Welcome to the ancient city of Jerusalem, where Jesus arrived for his last meal with the disciples. In less than 24 hours, Jesus will be killed by many of the same people who were hailing him as their king near the temple just days ago. Why? Let's start with one of the closest followers of Jesus, Judas. Judas, one of the closest followers of Jesus, was made by a terrible decision that dark night. While leaving the upper towards the house of the high priest, Satan entered him. Knowing the whereabouts of Jesus, who was heading to the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas betrayed his master with a kiss. From that moment on, the story was sealed and the tragedy began to unfold. Jesus, feeling the overwhelming weight of what was to come, withdrew to the Garden of Gethsemane, a place of deep spiritual significance. There, among the centuries-old olive trees who witnessed their moments of anguish, he fell into prayer. The agony was so intense that his sweat became blood drops, a rare phenomenon known as hematidrosis. While the night advanced and the betrayal of Judas approached, Jesus faced not only imminent physical pain, but also the spiritual burden of carrying the sins of humanity. Even in the face of extreme suffering, he submitted his will to Heavenly Father with the impactful words, "Father, my will, but yours." After the betrayal of Judas, the soldiers led by him and the main priests arrived in the Garden of Gethsemane to arrest Jesus. The atmosphere was loaded with tension and betrayal. While Jesus was in deep prayer, Judas approached and identified him with a kiss, a sign of his betrayal. The disciples, surprised by the presence of the soldiers, panicked. Peter, in an impulsive act to protect his master, drew the sword and wounded one of the servants of the high priest, cutting his ear. But Jesus, in a gesture of love and mercy, even in the face of betrayal and violence, healed the servant and delivered himself peacefully to the soldiers. This moment marked not only the beginning of the arrest of Jesus, but also the confirmation of his mission of sacrifice and redemption. After the betrayal of Judas and the arrest of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was taken to face a series of unjust judgments led by religious leaders and Roman authorities. The first of these judgments occurred in the house of the high priest, where Jesus submitted to an accusatory interrogation. Meanwhile, Peter, one of the closest disciples of Jesus, faced his own test of loyalty by denying him to know him 3 times, thus fulfilling the prophecy made by Jesus earlier. Despite the false accusations and contradictory witnesses presented by the religious leaders, Jesus remained silent in the face of unfounded accusations. This judgment marked the beginning of a series of events that would culminate in the crucifixion of Jesus as part of the Redeemer plan established by God for humanity. After being submitted to the first trial at the high priest's house, Jesus was taken to flagellation, a brutal form of Roman punishment. The Roman soldiers stripped him and tied him to a column, exposing his body to cruelty and violence. With a phlegrum, a whip with several streams and sharp metal tips, the soldiers hit Jesus repeatedly, tearing their skin and muscles. Each blow was accompanied by the whip sound cutting the air and the flesh being torn. The intense pain that Jesus endured during the flagellation was unbearable to most men, but he remained silent, accepting suffering as part of the sacrifice he was willing to do for all humanity. After the brutal scourge imposed on Jesus, he was led before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor responsible for judging the cases in the province of Judea. Faced with the pressure of the religious leaders and the gathered multitude, Pilate faced a dilemma-free Jesus, whom he considered innocent, or Barabbas, a condemned criminal. In an attempt to appease the exalted crowd, Pilate offered the choice between liberating Jesus, known as Christ, and Barabbas. The decision fell on the crowd that, instigated by envious religious leaders and manipulated by fear and misinformation, cried for the freedom of Barabbas and the crucifixion of Jesus. This fulfilled the prophecy of the suffering servant who was betrayed by his people and surrendered to unjust death. After flagellation and unjust judgments, Jesus was forced to carry his own cross to the place of crucifixion, known as Golgotha. The path of the cross was marked by insults, spit, and mockery of the Roman soldiers and the crowded crowd. Each step was an agony, every stumble a brutal reminder of the suffering that was coming. The weight of the cross by pressing their bloody shoulders, the open wounds opening with each movement. Upon reaching the top of the hill of Golgotha, Jesus was preached on the cross between two criminals, thus fulfilling the prophecy of the suffering servant. The crowd watched silently as the soldiers raised the cross with him suspended in it. And there, between heaven and earth, Jesus began his final journey of redemption and sacrifice for humanity. As the sun reached its peak and the crowd clustered around the hill of Golgotha, a solemn silence hovered over the place of crucifixion. While Jesus hung on the cross, nailed to the hands and feet, physical pain was only part of the suffering he endured. Amid the agony of injuries and public humiliation, Jesus looked at those who had abandoned and betrayed him. In a moment of deep spiritual connection, he looked up at heaven and uttered the words that would echo for eternity. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? My God, why have you abandoned me? In this divine moment, the redemption of humanity was in full compliance. While Jesus experienced not only the physical separation of imminent death, but also the temporary spiritual separation of his communion with the Father. These words were not a sign of weakness or despair, but a testimony of the immeasurable burden that he carried in the name of all sinners. As heaven darkened and the earth trembled before the magnitude of this supreme sacrifice, Jesus remained firm in his mission of love and redemption. Hostility against Jesus by religious authorities and the multitude in Jerusalem, well, it really reflects the complexity of the messianic expectations of the Jewish people at the time. Many expected a powerful Messiah who would free Israel from Roman oppression and restore the kingdom of David throughout his glory. However, Jesus' message, challenged these expectations by emphasizing a spiritual kingdom and individual redemption based on love and mercy. His refusal to align herself with the nationalist and military views of the time disappointed those who longed for an earthly and political leader. In addition, religious authorities saw in Jesus a threat to their power and influence on the people, leading them to conspire against him to preserve their status quo. Jesus' condemnation to death reveals not only the political and religious conflicts of the time, but also the profound misunderstanding of the true nature of his redemptive ministry and mission. After supporting flagellation, unjust judgments, and crucifixion, Jesus spoke the final words that would echo for eternity: "It is consummated." This seemingly simple phrase, well, it contained a deep and transforming meaning. In giving these words, Jesus not only indicated the end of his earthly journey, but also announced the fulfillment of a divine mission of redemption and salvation for all humanity. "It is consummated" represented the victory over sin and death, the fulfillment of the ancient prophecies, and the manifestation of God's unconditional love for humanity. At this crucial moment in history, Jesus' supreme sacrifice opened the gates of grace and reconciliation for all who seek salvation. His death on the cross was not the end, but the beginning of a new covenant between God and men, based on faith, hope, and forgiveness. May these words resonate in our hearts as a reminder of the redeeming sacrifice of Christ and the eternal promise of life in his presence. If you were moved by this story, share this video so that more people can know Jesus' sacrifice for us. May this message touch your heart and remind you of the unconditional love God has for each of us. May peace be with you.